Hello everyone, welcome to our fourth video on community organizing, and for this video we'll be talking about community participatory action research. So what we're going to do in this particular video lecture is that we will discuss about the definition and the different principles of community-based participatory action research, or CBPAR, and we're going to be discussing about the different processes and steps involved in doing CBPAR. And then the sources for this are included in your modules. That is the article by Wilson. So remember that we're talking in the context of place-based organizing. So what is community-based participatory action research? So CBPAR is a collaborative approach to research that involves all stakeholders throughout the research process, from establishing the research question to developing data collection tools to analyzing and disseminating the findings. So let's kind of segmentize this definition so that we'll be able to really get into the different principles already. So let's try to reflect on this definition and try to look at keywords and phrases that will help us sort of draw insights from the principles of CBPAR and how it's related to the principles that we previously discussed in community organizing. So first, it's very collaborative in terms of approach. So how is it different from the usual research that we do from your research subjects? Usually when we think about research, when we design research, it's really very much researcher oriented. No? So it's the researcher who thinks about the research, designs the research, thinks about the procedures, the methodology. But in CBPAR, while of course we still make use of data collection tools that are rigorous and trustworthy, but the design and the research questions and the approaches are done in a collaborative manner. So, sino yung nagko-collaborate dito? Who are the people collaborating in a CBPAR? It's the stakeholders. It's the people in the community. So, in place-based organizing, the community people should have a stake in terms of the research that we do. Again, remember, when we talk about CBPAR, we talk about this in the entry phase, when we are entering the community and we're trying to find out what are the different issues and concerns in the particular community that needs helping. And again, this collaboration is not only in particular phases of the research. It's not just in conceptualizing or in the empirical phase or in the analysis phase, but this collaboration, this interface between the researcher and the researched, again, we shouldn't be doing that. And also, because we do not say that they're just merely respondents or participants, but they are collaborators. They're actually called co-researchers, The people who are collecting data from are our co-researchers. So we're constructing the data with them based on, jointly agreed upon research problem. So those are some of the insights that we can gain for this particular definition that we have here. So again, to reiterate, it's community-based. So, most research that we do, usually, particularly the large ones that we make, we usually are very much interested in control and being able to remove the context out of the social variables that we are studying. But in this case, we are aware that we are collecting data in a particular community. And so therefore, all of the contexts in the community, all of the natural settings, all of the social realities within that community is not controlled as we collect the data. So it's grounded in the needs, issues, concerns, and strategies of communities and the community-based organizations that serve them. So it's not based on what's the gap in the literature. Well, of course, we can address the literature when we're doing CBPAR, but the knowledge building in this case is not based on knowledge as is already present in the literature, in research, in the scholarly world, but basically the needs and the issues and the concern and the research focus that we have is based on what is found in the environment and the social realities in that particular community. And since we're doing CBPAR within the community organizing process, it's participatory. So like I said in the previous slide, right? So the research problem identification, the methodology, and the analysis, the people in the community has to take some part no? If not, a larger part, some ownership in terms of the research process. And so we directly engage the communities and the community knowledge in the research process and its outcomes. And so we asked the participants to be researchers themselves, trying to research in the community. So we can kind of tool them, provide them with the tools for them to be able to do research, and also look at the tools that they're able to do in terms of collecting data and try to see how we can improve it or use it, as we collect data. And very important is action-based and oriented. So it means that we are collecting, data and analyzing data, not for the sake of just, building theory, building new knowledge, adding to the literature, but we're collecting data and analyzing the data because we want to try to solve a particular problem in the community, make projects, programs, and interventions relating to the community. Again, also in identifying those projects, interventions, the community is still a part of it. And the actions that come out of that, people will reflect on those actions, on those interventions, and they will try to, go back and see how the projects and interventions can be modified and revised so that, the efficiency and the efficacy of these particular interventions can be improved, and then they try it out again until some form of sustainability and efficacy is being met. And so it's action-based. So it's not just to expand the literature. It's not just to expand the knowledge. It's, we're doing research because we want to be able to elicit change, right? So it's support and enhancing the strategic action that leads to community transformation and social change, and hopefully for the good. Yeah. And so we have to talk about the epistemological roots of CBPAR. When we say epistemology is how do we study about reality? How do we know reality? And this is very important in terms of trying to find out our position as a researcher in a particular research project. So probably in your quantitative and your qualitative research classes, you learned about, your position as a researcher, what is social reality. When you're doing quantitative research, you're leaning towards positivism and trying to, deduce social reality into dimensions that can be measured quantitatively, etc. And then you try to use statistics in order to get through that. And then you have qualitative, where, you kind of already admit that there are some historical and social contexts that cannot be controlled as you would want in a quantitative research. But the goal here is to understand, and that's closely related to CBPAR, but there's more to it than just doing research that is basically based on social realities or social context. So first, CBPAR rejects positivist approaches. So the things that we talked about in quantitative research, in statistics, it kind of rejects that, because in statistics, we are trying to prescribe the social constructs. And so this is very much in terms of the power relationship between the researcher and the participants, the power in terms of trying to shape reality within a research project is in the researcher. And that's the frustration that CBPAR has in terms of doing research, is that who decides on what is empowerment in terms of measuring empowerment? So those are some arguments in relation to that. When we say efficacy and confidence, these are the things that we want to increase in a particular community. Who decides how that is measured? Most of the time, particularly prior to the participatory shift in thinking about community development, it has always been the researcher, it has always been the developer, and we think about the community as passive pawns, governable people who just follow what the development practitioner or the agency is saying about what is true, about what they need as a people, what they need as a community, what they need as households and individuals, and kind of rejects that, because when you do research that is positivist, the power resides in those who make the research, on the researchers, on the learned person, on people from the university or from the academia. thinking that they have the best knowledge of how the world works in the context of the community. But this kind of rejects that, because again, when you talk about the basic principles of community organizing and community life, it is the people in the community who knows best in terms of how to identify, explain, and solve their problems. All they need to have is some form of facilitation. All they need to have is some form of, guiding them in terms of how they plan towards, their A and B. And actually, the question of what is a good life, what is quality of life, what is well-being, what is happiness, differs from one community to the next, because each community has a history, has a culture, and the researcher can't just come there. And this is what I want you to do. These are the developmental outcomes that is dreamed of by the local and the national government, and let's see how you fare in this particular indicators. And CBPAR rejects that. Well, not entirely rejects, but it's very critical of it, Very critical tayo about just measuring income. Critical tayo about just measuring food insecurity. How many times you don't get to eat a day. About, the behaviors that people do in terms of environment, etc. But what really is important in the community, and these are some things that may not have metrics that we know from a context of the academe or the context of those doing planning, And so there's a heavy critique on positivist approaches. And, there's always that argument that these are the objective truths. This is what good life is. This is what quality of life means. You have to have good income. You have to have education. Well, that's true. And these are basic needs. That's fine. No, but at the end of the day, in terms of how to have a safe community, how to have economic prosperity, and the different social contexts that prohibit people and communities from getting into that particular state. These are best answered by the communities, not merely just the researcher bringing in all these indicators coming from the development agencies, coming from the national agencies and local agencies that they are answerable to. So it's really in terms of, we think about community problems and community issues from the people's collective involvement in researching their own circumstances. They know what is up. They know the complexities of the problems entrenched within their social realities. Our goal as a researcher, a CBPAR researcher, a community developer, which of course you cannot kind of separate or divorce them. Our goal is to be able to help them, facilitate, give them the tools so that they will be able to articulate these issues better, analyze these issues better, but not, lead them, provide them with, indicators. I mean, indicators you can provide them, but sure, you have to think beyond indicators. You have to think beyond what agencies are asking you to measure. So, also, we talk about, Paulo Freire, because this particular scholar is very much influential in terms of developing and thinking about CBPAR, about rejecting and questioning dominant narratives, hegemonic discourses that have, in a way, further colonized us, So, arguments about how Western ways of thinking and knowing, when applied to people, this can, further increase the already present oppression in our lives. And some of these dominant discourses can be found in the natural way of doing education, in the natural way of doing research. And so we have to kind of, the development planning and the development research that we do, we have to critique them, because some of them really, minoritize people and see people as just governable bodies, as people that you can just, control, and forgets that, people and groups of people have unique social circumstances, may have unique social aspirations that might not be very equivalent to what large indicators of developmental outcomes are. And so and trying to challenge dominant narratives of how we do education, about how we do development, how we do thinking, and research is a way for us to be less oppressed. Not as is a starting point, to fight against oppression. Let's fight against the dominant narratives, the dominant discourses that try to control the way we police ourselves, the way we think about our realities. And of course, in relation to this is also critical theory. So CBPAR is also very much in tune with critical theory, more than just in understanding that reality is social constructed. So for quantitative positivists, reality is objective, right? And then for qualitative, the traditional ones, reality is socially constructed. But critical theory goes further. Reality is socially constructed. Socially constructed for whom? There are political ramifications of how social realities are constructed. And doing research from a critical theory standpoint has to ask that, right? Or has to critique that. But at the same time, it also offers an alternative vision. So this is a dominant way of thinking, a dominant way of doing research, a dominant way of, how social reality is trying to, press its dominance against people, particularly those who are poor and disenfranchised. And so it offers us alternative visions. And so where should knowledge come from then? In order to fight, in order to, to address the issues in relation to knowledge being oppressive. And therefore, knowledge should come from the people themselves. And so critical theory has two things. One, it critiques the dominant ways of doing research, dominant ways of thinking about reality. At the same time, it offers alternative visions of how we should think about realities, social realities of people. And that's the second part these are two parts that we are doing in CBPAR, but more on the second part. We're trying to understand social reality from the vantage point of the grassroots. So it is through utilitarian problem solving, and not just a researcher, and not just a group of people trying to tell you what the indicators are and what metrics needs to be done so that you are a better, an improving community. It's also normative, and it also utilizes normative social cultural values. So if it's particularly most of our development work, they're very Western. So how do you see the Filipino flavor? How do you see the Filipino values, and particularly for local culture, subcultures within the Philippines, particularly for disenfranchised cultures like indigenous peoples? There are different ways of doing research, that we don't name them as research, but these are ways of collecting data, thinking about data, analyzing data, drawing insights. And indigenous peoples, they thrive over centuries, they thrive over generations because they're able to transmit this data. And we have to respect those ways of thinking that are not necessarily positivist in nature. And probably you've heard of this in your science, technology, and society classes. Traditional ecological knowledge, even spiritualities, these are important things that we need to be asking and invoking when we're trying to design research. And of course, very important is emancipation, because at the end of the day, sometimes we do research, we collect data, and then we move to the next, we publish our work, that's done. But for CBPAR, there has to be some form of emancipation, and emancipation does not only start when you're done with collecting the data and analyzing the data, when you've already created the action that will improve their work. But emancipation, thinking about emancipating the community, thinking about empowering the community, should begin in the research process itself. Engage them in the research. Yeah. So Israel, further details what are the other principles of CBPAR. So again, it recognizes the community as the unit of measure, a unit of analysis, I would say. So for example, in quantitative research, we have different units of analysis, particularly the individual, probably groups, household, etc. But for CBPAR, we think of a community as a unit, but a diverse unit, with interdependent people and households and different institutions or organizations inside them, and groups, and then remember our discussions about the kaleidoscopic community. So that's how we have to look at it. And so it's very holistic. It's not quantitative. Like, you have to define, operationalize each and everything. You have to have an inclusion criteria. Hindi siya ganon. No? We think about things very holistically when we do CBPAR. So CBPAR builds on strengths and resources within the community. So again, when we think about possible solutions, we think first, ano ba yung resources na available? What are the human resources, natural resources, social resources available, cultural capital found in the community? Number 3, it facilitates collaborative, equitable, meaning we have to make sure that there is justice and equal participation in relation to certain barriers and certain identities, and partnership in all research phases, not just at the end, not just during data collection, but from the very beginning until the end, and involves the empowering power sharing processes and attends to social inequalities. So again, another argument of CBPAR from the normal research is that, again, the power relations between the researcher and the researched, the researcher and the respondent, is that the power lies more in the researcher in terms of directing the research, and we want to kind of flatten that power gap between the researcher and the researched. Sometimes to the point, and most of the time to the point, that we call our participants or community participants as co-researchers, and I mentioned this earlier. CBPAR promotes co-learning and capacity building among all members or all partners. So when say co-learning, it means that we also get to learn from them about the way they synthesize data. How do they draw insights from what they experience? Because it's very important. Next, it integrates and achieves a balance between research and action for the mutual benefit of all partners. So we explained that also earlier. Next, CBPAR emphasizes collective well-being as opposed to just individuals or just, again, ticking metrics or indicators in a scale. Problems of local relevance and ecological perspectives that attend to multiple determinants of health, disease, and well-being. Number 7, it involves systems development through a cyclical and iterative process. So when we say a cyclical, iterative, another thing that differentiates CBPAR from usual research is that research in the traditional sense is linear. You think of a problem, you collect the data, treat the data, analyze the data, you're done. But CBPAR is cyclical and iterative. Like, you are collecting the data, you're analyzing the data, but you feel like because of the analysis of the data, you feel like there's more other things that you have to collect from other people. Again, there's no inclusion criteria, no specific target of participants. The whole community, all of the kaleidoscopic elements of the community are part. So if you want to be able to get deep into the problem roots, then you have to collect as data as you can. Even if you are already in the middle of analysis, even if you're already in the middle of analysis, then new problems spring up. Then that makes it elicits more areas of inquiry within the community. And so it's iterative. It's not a linear process, just like what you do when you do quantitative research. CBPAR disseminates findings and knowledge gained to all partners and involves all partners in the dissemination process. So we tell them, about their research problems. And for example, in our case, if we have to collect, quantitative data. Remember, CBPAR is not qualitative, just qualitative. We can also collect quantitative data as needed because there are data naman talaga that you cannot, qualify. For example, age. You want to see the age pyramid of the population. So we present it to the people, and then we tell them, this is your population pyramid in terms of age and sex. What do you think? What do you think about the age, the age and the population pyramid? Do you have a low base? Mababa? Bakit kaya madami kayo? bakit makapal yung nasa baba ng population pyramid niyo? Bakit kaya? And then, you try to elicit, kasi alam mo, marami sa aming nang nag-aanak, hindi masyadong maalam in relation to family planning. And so, that, we have a figure in front, and then we don't tell them, you know what, you have a very broad base. It means that you have problems in relation to reproductive health. We don't tell them that. We allow them to figure things out, based on their understanding, because maybe they have other alternative visions about it, So that's very important. Next, CBPAR requires long-term process and commitment to sustainability. So CBPAR is not divorced from the phases we discussed last video. It's actually part of the entry phase, and it can be also a part of the other phases based on the need, that arises as we go along. CBPAR addresses issues of race, ethnicity, racism, and social class, and embraces cultural humility. Again, the researcher does not come there and thinks that he is a savior or they are a savior for the particular community. They hold all of the answers to the questions of the community. No, you're not a god. No, you always remember that you're there. The community knows their problem. You're just there to help them figure it out, but not give the solutions, not tell them what the problem is. So those are the principles of CBPAR. And so when we engage in participation, so in relation to CBPAR, this is the participation continuum, and of course sometimes researchers would tend to go less in terms of participation continuum. And there are, when you are in the community, there are some times that you have to be a little bit less, you would elicit less participation from the community in relation to data collection. Like for example, in our case, as nurses, not all the participants know how to take blood pressure. So, we collected blood pressure in the beginning, but eventually we train them how to take blood pressure, we train them how to take vital signs, so that later on they get to be a part of, especially when we're doing blood pressure drives, in the community, then we have other community people to help us. Next part is the community helps identify the RQs and provide some responses, but the researchers are the ones who does the research analysis, dissemination, and design intervention eventually. And then the next part is that the community helps identify the research questions, provide some responses, and help generate solutions. But the researchers are the one who collect and analyze the data, disseminate the findings, and design the interventions. But in full participation, this is a community-led and controlled research. So community defines the issues, creates data collection tools, recruits participants and collects data, analyzes, disseminates findings, generates and carries out action plans and interventions. They are full collaborator at all stages. And I think this is, of course, not something that you can already realize as upon entering a community. Sometimes maybe you may be in the second or in the third, but eventually when you are in the strengthening and sustainability phase, they should be able to do this on their own, and that's why trainings are very important. Capacitation is very important so that they'll be able to do the research when you are done. When you're done with your development process in that particular community that you're organizing, they should be able to do the same process as you did, if not better. So what are some of the research ethics that we have to take note of in terms of CBPAR? It follows, it follows all of the basic ones that you've learned in your quantitative and your qualitative research. But there are, of course, more nuanced ethics. First one is the accessibility of the findings. You have to tell them about, about the data, about what you think this analysis is about, and of course, you ask them for alternative visions about those findings. And then the research should be for the benefits of the participants, not because of compliance in relation to the development practitioner or the ones doing community organizing. Again, the voice of the community is very important in relation to developing the process, the procedures, and also trying to analyze the data. There should be credit and representation, and this is very tricky because, like, for example, you want to publish the work, And since they're co-researchers, you have to put, the community's name in the byline of the authors. But again, you have to ensure that since they are co-authors, they are also co-researchers, they are authors, they are listed as the authors of this particular research. Data ownership must be the community. No, they should own. There should be division of labor should be equitable, and really based on the expertise of the researcher and the trainings provided for the participants. Of course, again, the research question should be aiming towards justice. There should be respect, so informed consent, interviewing them during their own time, collecting data during their own time. And of course, at the end of everything, rigorous dapat yung research. So if in the process of designing with your participants or with the community people, they say, we want to have a full good census. At feeling namin, kailangan namin ng magandang censusing ng buong community. Gusto naming malaman ang edad ng lahat, ang sexual distribution ng lahat, gusto naming malaman ang mortality, morbidity rate, gusto naming malaman ang geographical concentration ng mga kabataan, geographical concentration ng mga matatanda, gusto naming malaman kung nasaan yung mga tao na at risk for a particular. So these are their requests, these are the problems and the research questions that they identify. This will need quantitative, right? So particularly for communities that do not have human resources that will provide those technical expertise, that's where you jump in and say, those are good ideas. I think those data is important, And then, so you teach them, you co-design with them, and using your technical expertise, how do you use quantitative surveying, geomapping, so that we'll be able to understand the community better, following the research rigor. So hindi pa rin nawawala yung research rigor. Nagkataon lang na the quantitative aspect was not defined by you. The quantitative aspect was because this was the identified needs of the participants. I hope that makes sense. So, what are the different CBR phases? Again, the phases, they coincide with some of the phases in community organizing. So, the first or the second phase is partner engagement or project design. The authors would argue that this is interchangeable. I would argue that partner engagement should be first. But I guess if you are an issue-based community organizer, meaning you're coming from a development agency or a local agency or a government agency with a particular expertise in mind. You're not coming in as a generalist social worker or a generalist development worker that, will just be eliciting things vaguely from the community. If you're coming in from a technical standpoint, like for example, you're coming from DNR, you want to study about anything about environment and ecology, or you are a disability rights specialist. So you're coming in with a disability perspective, or you are an LGBTQIA plus activist, and you're coming in with a particular goal in mind, right? So maybe project design can begin in the beginning, but again, when you engage with the partner, this is again iterative, so you have general research objectives in mind, like general things that can still be it should be malleable, flexible, so that the community can still inform the specific objectives or can change if needed, right? But if you are a generalist community organizing, you work in your, for example, general, you just work about poverty or food insecurity. So you get into the community first, and then you develop the research questions when you get there. But generally, in partner engagement, you form a partnership. So think again about the community organizing phases we discussed the last week. You already think that we're doing it. The assessment should be in the form of CBPAR, not just any type of assessment. And while you're there, you have to assess community strengths and dynamics. So in the readings, there are particular steps to that. So I want you to really read them very carefully. I won't really be putting them out in this video, but I want you to read them, as an addition to this video lecture. And then eventually you're going to project design. So You identify priorities and research questions with the community, and then you design the research with the community based on the resources and based on the research questions that they are identified. And then, of course, you collect the data with the community people. Again, training is important because if you want to empower the community, you want them to also collect the data side by side. But you just don't, oh, here's the survey form and collect the data. No, you have to teach them, train them as you would a researcher. So this is how you will administer a survey. This is how you will do the experiment. Although I don't know why one would do an experiment in a CBPAR. But usually we use survey. And then for qualitative research, we do interviews, FGDs, ethnographic fieldwork. We can also do visual methods, like we can do photo elicitation, or photo ethnography, or we can also do mapping, geomapping. Again, to address the research questions that were identified earlier. Again, so unlike quantitative research where you really have to be very coherent, consistent about the research question, the dimensions, the measures. This one, this is the research question. Let's think of all of the data possibilities that can be able to address these particular questions. So multi methods is fine for community, just as long as this is very towards efficacious and effective understanding and intervention planning for the community. And then of course you collaborate with the data analysis with the community. You identify the themes of the findings with the community, and then seeking feedback with the community. Are these fair findings? Do this really reflect the issues in the community, right? And then we report the findings. Usually, of course, not everyone is going to be collecting the data. Not all of the 100 households in the community will collect the data for you, right? Of course, these are, you will spot particular people who are, of course, willing to volunteer to be a part. So, you still have to tell everyone about the results. So usually in my case, with the students before, when you're doing community organizing, we do community assemblies and we tell them, okay, so this is these are the findings, etc., etc. I remember we would put, because we didn't have projectors back then, we did have projectors back then, but there was no place in the community for us to be able to project things. So we would put our findings, we would buy rolls and rolls of Manila paper and draw our graphs there, draw our findings there, draw our community maps there, right? With all of the spot maps, with all of the legends and everything. So I remember, staying up until 10 p.m. with my classmates. We would draw these things because the next day we will be driving to the community and we will be presenting to them the outputs of our census, the outputs of etc., etc. And then, of course, translating the research findings based again from what the participants reflect on those findings. And so after that, you can proceed now with the organizing phase. Remember the last video, there's an organizing phase. So based on these problems and the programs that kind of co-develop with the participants, how do we now organize? How do we ensure that there is a logical framework and a logical assignment of people within the community so that these programs and projects can be realized, and you now use your org dev skills. And then for the community diagnosing, when you say community diagnosing, this is something that we use in public health. This means that we do census of the communities, and then we automatically, even if the participants don't ask us, we already ask about their morbidity rates. Morbidity means ano yung pinakasikat na sakit in their community. Mortality rates is what are the usual causes of death in the community. We collect this data because we want them to be informed about what are the health trends in their communities. But this is not only just health, but this can also be social things, like for example transportation. You also talk about even spiritual religious practices. You can ask them about reproductive health, reproductive practices can also be asked. You know, spot maps can be done every so often so that you would see how the community is growing, is changing. And then based on what you think is needed, you can do it yearly, or you can do it biennial, or every 2 years or every 3 years, based on how fast you think the community is urbanizing, or how fast the community is developing, or if there's a lot of in-migration or out-migration in the community, then you might want to be able to track them by doing censuses, every so often, beyond the national schedule of the census, which is every 10 years. So yeah, so make sure that CBPAR capacities are sustained within the community, so that even pag alis ninyo, itong mga phases na ito, the communities can do this. So even if there is a problem that happens, even if you're not there, because they're capacitated, you have given them all of the tools to create forms, to be able to do interviews, then they'll be able to do CBPAR on their own. So, that is the end of this video lecture on community participatory action research. But I do implore that the 2 readings that I gave to you, you have to read them also, because a lot of examples are also provided there. This is basically introductory lecture, no? So yeah, I hope that you appreciate community participatory action research. It's a bit messy, I would say. Messy because as someone doing quantitative research, yeah, quantitative research is all about consistency, coherence, measurability, making sure that the indicators are the same. There's quality assurance there. No, it's almost McDonaldization ng nakikita natin doon. But in community participatory action research, it's messy because you, as the researcher, is not the only sole person in control of how the research will play out. You're going to be listening to different people in the community about how they think should an assessment of their community be done. And that is what makes this different from the scholarly based research that we have been doing, So there.